Right. So, like I said last week, while Juliet and Justine call it a case study, I'd like to call it a story. And this is a
Yes,
story
it's much better.
that started sometime in 2012 or maybe even before that. And that was to try and set up a conservation linked enterprise in one of the landscapes where we work. This is the same place from where I shared another story last week. And it's a place where we've been active for close to 20 years now. So um, this picture that you see is one of a typical community meeting that we might try to organize in this in one any of the villages actually. And the person in the cap at the center is Tinley, who is our field manager. So he's actually from one of the villages, and one of the things that he does very actively is to go into more and more villages and to understand if there is some conservation intervention that we can set up or start work on. He also helps coordinate a lot of our work there. But I had a question that I wanted to ask most of you: that is there anything strange or missing that you find in this image? And it's not about masks. This picture is from pre-COVID times. So it was still the good old days when you could huddle up in a crowd and 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 talk. But yeah, I can see there are some responses in chat. Can someone read those out? Um,
Yeah, it says no women, no women. Yes, no women. Exactly, no women. All men.
all men, yes. So
Mm.
I'm glad all of you seem to have picked it up. And it was around 2013 or 14 when some of our colleagues published work from this landscape. So they conducted surveys in over 20 villages in trying to understand what were the factors affecting attitudes at various scales, at the individual scale, at the scale of the village, and at the scale of the community. And while there were several interesting findings that this work pointed to, one clear pointer was the fact that uh, women tended to have more negative attitudes towards wildlife than the men. And it was also around the time that we had been also trying to see how we could engage women more proactively, because as things had been, and while we had at that point in time maybe been active for close to a little over a decade, much of the work that we did involved men. So it was not something that we had done by design, but it was probably an aspect of the structure of the community that inevitably it was the men who would participate in all of these meetings or engagements, or even administering programs if they were set up. We had also struggled to be able to get women into these activities, partly maybe the fact that we had fewer women in our team at that point in time. But there were several aspects that were leading up to this, and we were hoping to fix that. And one of the ways we thought we could do that was to try and set up this enterprise, which was linked to conservation, but that it would help supplement livelihoods, especially of the women, and that could help us hopefully improve their attitudes towards wildlife. And just to sort of look at other examples before us, we had some good examples that our partners, the Snow Leopard Trust, had by then successfully implemented in places like Mongolia, in Kyrgyzstan, and even in Pakistan. And the idea was that you set up an enterprise with the herding community or the community that you would aim to be working with. You help them with skill building, you help them with training, raw material, and whatever else is needed, and also back them in being able to market their products in domestic and international markets. And hopefully that would lead to incomes that could uh, go back to these communities, hopefully over time these programs could also become economically sustainable. And so with that idea in our mind and with those examples before us, we thought we would try and set up what was called Shen. And Shen essentially means snow leopard in the local uh, Scythian dialect, and Shen is what is written in Bhoti text in the logo. So that was how Shen was set up. We started, or our members of our team started talking to the women, reaching out to them in 2011 and 12. We did some very, very initial experiments, trying to conduct trainings and so on in 2013 and 14. And it was around 2015 that we were formally able to set this up and sort of start the enterprise the way we would have hoped for it to. And maybe a year into that, we made a little film, which was about what Shen is. And what I'm going to request Juliet maybe to do now is that I shall stop sharing, and I shall.
Okay. Thank you, Ajay. And I will try and share. And we're just going to attempt to do this.
With the sound, yeah, Julia?
Yeah, is it working?
Yeah.
NCF started working in Kibber almost 20 years ago. It's one of the last villages on that road. It's at about 4,200 meters. It's a beautiful, isolated village with about 70 households. It's a cold desert, so there's not too much wildlife, but it's in low densities and it's present everywhere. It's not limited to national parks, or it doesn't know where the boundaries of the village begin and where it should be and should not be. Sometimes there is conflict between the wildlife and the people.
स्नो लेपर्ड को स्पीति भाषा में शेन बोलते हैं। सर्दियों में हम लोग बेला बैठते हैं ना, इसलिए थोड़ा बहुत बनाए के उन लोग भेजेंगे, फिर हमारा वो हम लोगों के लिए जेब खर्चे के लिए ऐसा हेल्प किया उन लोगों ने।
So one of the main reasons we started Shen, which is a livelihood enterprise, is to involve women in conservation practices. It's an important icebreaker that we've had with the women.
कभी हम उसको बेंगलोर लेके गए और कभी हम लोग ट्रेनर्स को इधर लाके इस तरह से हम लोगों ने शेन को स्टार्ट किया।
It was the first time a lot of the women were coming out of Spiti, and it was very exciting for them.
क्वालिटी किस तरह से इम्प्रूव करना है, साइजिंग किस तरह से करना है, और उसमें क्या था कि हम लोगों ने क्रोशे का भी उनको इंट्रोड्यूस किया।
पहले हमारे को इतना क्रोशे का नहीं आता ना जी, क्रोशे से फूल बनाना, फूल का पत्ता बनाना, सब कुछ सिखाया। बहुत सीख मिला हमारे को वहाँ से, बहुत फर्क पड़ा।
मार्केटिंग का तो हम लोग हेल्प कर ही रहे हैं, और उसमें उनको कैसे रॉ मटेरियल्स लेना है, किस तरह से कॉस्टिंग करना है, तो अभी बहुत कुछ सीखने की ज़रूरत है। लेकिन लेडीज क्या है कि इंटरेस्ट दिखा रहे हैं और सीख भी सकते हैं, और आगे जाके वो अपना सेल्फ सस्टेन हो सकते हैं।
They have participated in our education program, and it was the first time any of the women were a part of it, even though we invited them many times before, which was very nice for all the kids who were there, because it's, I think, important to have women as a part of it. So the long-term goal of Shen is for the women to take ownership of their landscape and wildlife, and this is just the beginning. We hope that it will allow the women to be the primary conservationists in this landscape.
Thank you. Thanks, Juliet. And so I'll go back
Ah.
to my boring slides. Right. So then, I hope I'm audible, and I hope people were able to view the video. Yeah.
Yes, that was
Okay,
great.
great.
That was such
Thank
an uplifting story. Thank you.
Yes. Now that's the story, but now I will try and share the backstory of the story. And the backstory is, I wouldn't say it's a bad one, but it's one in which we learned a lot. So when we started, and like Radhika, then my colleague, she said that we hope that this would be a livelihood enterprise, that. And so what I'll try and do is to sort of list out some of the aspects we thought, or how we thought this program would run, and how it would eventually help us achieve the outcomes that we were hoping to. So we thought that we would provide training and skill enhancement to the women, and sort of support them in designing products that were contemporary, which could be then sold in the market. When we started out, we also hoped that we would source the raw material from these families, because the primary raw material we were likely to work with was wool, because that was a raw material that the women were comfortable working with. And so we hoped that we could also buy the wool from these participants, which would mean that we could, their livelihood would be enhanced even more, and that it would also reduce the overall footprint of our effort, and it would just make things easier to manage. We also hope that by all of the capacity building and bringing in trainers, that we would be able to develop some very good quality products. And while doing so, we would not lose focus of the fact that we also wanted to go back and link it all to conservation, because like Radhika said, one of the things we were aiming for is that women would become part of this discourse on conservation, and maybe even go on to become uh, the primary conservationists in these landscapes. We hope that through all of this, we would be able to provide them a market which is not only local, but across the country in India, and possibly even internationally. And that there will be orders coming in very regularly, and we'll be making a lot of stuff, and that would be in demand because this is such a fantastic story, and that things would pick up. And finally, that all of this would sort of lead to an improvement in the livelihoods of the participants, and that would improve their attitudes, and that that the women would come forward and take greater ownership of their life. So so that was the assumption with which we sort of set this up, and I'll go back to each of these points, and because last week when we spoke, I think one of the things that Justine stressed on was the aspect of context, and how that is important, because what we had seen before us were examples from Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan, and we were hoping to sort of use that as a frame to replicate it in our landscape. Now, when we looked at Spiti, and in the particular context of the areas where we were working, we realized that their primary source of income was uh, the was agriculture, which was a cash crop. The cash crop was green peas, And this was grown in a short period of summer, which was about 3 to 4 months in the year. And all of the time, a preparation for the agriculture and following the agricultural cycle, which involved any amount of field work or working in the fields, was entirely managed by the women. So already as we started, we realized that the women were going to be too busy to be able to become part of this enterprise for the entire year. And that was something that even the women shared with us as we started off. And it turned out that the only time they could participate was during the 3 or 4 months of peak winter, when there was lesser activity in the house, and that they would be able to devote time for it. So that already sort of reduced the possibilities for us. We also knew that we could only work with wool. And so, when we started off, or when we set this effort in motion, we were more concerned about things like how many women we were able to train, or how many trainings we would be able to conduct, or how many products we would be able to make, and so on. And these were certain compromises that we had to make, because that is just how the setting was. We had also hoped that we would buy the raw wool from these people themselves, and that it would help enhance their livelihood. But what had happened in the landscape was that people were keeping lower number of sheep and goat, and significantly so. So whatever local wool was available was being used by the people themselves to make stuff which they would use in the winter months. We also realized that the quality was probably not the best that it would be needed. It would need some treatment and so on, specifics that we only realized once we got into the details of it. And that given all of these considerations, it was probably more economical or more viable to buy wool from outside, which still had a larger footprint, but in the context of the enterprise, that is something we would have to do. And so we had we had to sort of alter our plan of how we would source the raw material. And so certain things became important, how the cost of raw material would be, because earlier we were happy to pay a higher price because we thought it would go to the herders. But when we were getting raw material from the outside, we wanted to make sure that uh, it was economical. We realized that there would be a cost for the transport of these materials, because this was a fairly remote area. So those were the kind of uh, aspects that we were trying to keep an eye out on, and just the quantities that we would require. How much would we need for a particular year of production, and so on. So again, there was a shift from how we had originally thought of it, from to how it was playing out when we started. We were also hoping that we would, develop high quality products and a strong conservation link. But with time, we realized that each of the participants who knew how to knit were at a different level of skill. That some of them were very good and very fast at making products, while other participants needed more time. And all of that added to the complexity of how do we compensate the participants, because they were being compensated for their time. And so how do we standardize the time for each product? So those were the kind of parameters we struggled with. There were aspects of quality control. And initially, when we started out, our team was doing much of the quality control, and our team uh, at that point felt that sometimes women were uncomfortable with the decisions being made of certain women's products not being selected or being asked to be remade, and so on. And so there was again an aspect of complexity that we had to uh, deal with there. We had hoped that all of the products that we would make would be sold locally and in India and internationally. Now, a point to note is that because we were working with synthetic wool, we weren't able to sell internationally because there wasn't a great demand for it. So automatically our market was reduced to India and locally. Even in India, the weather in India is mostly hot, and so woolen products had a very limited time in which people might want to buy it, at best a month or two. Uh, and that probably the best place to sell these products was also in Spiti itself, where tourists were increasing, and there were longer durations of cold weather. So all of this also became important because we had to plan the production of how many products to make each year, because we didn't want to sit on piles of products that we were unable to sell. And one of the things that the women did in this was to participate or to help us in marketing their products. And I'll sort of come to that in detail a little further. And lastly, the whole assumption that all of this would lead to a lot of enhancement in livelihood, and then it would have downstream benefits. Now, based on all the points that I shared with you, you would realize that there was a very, very small window in which we could work and develop products and so on. And we realized that the amount of money we were being able to pay the women at the end of participation was was not a very high or a very attractive figure. So those were the kind of numbers we were also tracking. And just to sort of share with you, 3 years ago, the average participant would earn about $48 in a year. And this year, in 2021, that price has gone down, or that amount has gone down to just about $10, because of COVID, the tourist inflow has completely dried up, and so the number of products made and number of products sold have gone down. And so even if you look at the best case of how much we were able to pay, $50 in a year, it's a very, very small fraction of the household income. It's probably no more than 1 to 3% of what the household would earn. And so that led us to questions of wondering whether all of this did make sense. And if it did make sense, in what way did it make sense? But all along the way, we've had this learning on the field of how it was in design to how it played out. And there were various aspects and parameters that we were trying to keep an eye out on. And what I might now do is to stop here and maybe invite Justine to sort of speak about these aspects in the frameworks that she has been presenting to us. And I might come back later and share a few more experiences of how we were trying to monitor the various aspects of this program as we went along. So I will stop sharing now. And if there are any questions at this point, I'll be happy to take those. But yeah.
Thanks, Ajay. Yeah, I think if there are any questions, we can do that first. I see there's already one from Kamal. What is the institutional mechanism?
Sure. So Kamal, what happens in many of these villages is that there are these women's self-help groups which have been organized at the level of the village. So the women are officially registered as a self-help group. And what we did when we set this up was to go and meet the women's self-help group and to talk with them to set this up. What was then done is that they would set up a committee. So at the level of each village or each community that is now participating in this intervention, they have a committee of 3 members, and they have some criteria for selecting these 3 members, and these are rotating positions. So they serve for a period of 3 years, and they try to keep an overlap. So they have some members who will sort of stay on while new members come on, and so on. So that is how they are organizing themselves. What we are doing is we provide them with capacity building and opportunities for training, and all of the material and things that are required are provided by us. We facilitate also the process of marketing the product. And all of these payments are made out to the women into their respective bank accounts based on who has made how much. And at the end of each year, there is also a conservation bonus that the community stands to gain if they fulfill a conservation commitment that they may have agreed upon. And that goes to the collective and not the individual. They can choose to use it the way they would like to. But yeah. Yeah, so Becky is asking how we decided. Yes, Becky. So, sorry, we did try to have some criteria. So the first village we started off with was with Kibber, and subsequently another the adjacent village called Chichin. Um, at that point, um, uh, I think the selection of those two villages was primarily because we were comfortable and we had been active in those villages for several years. It was also that these villages were villages which we sort of marked as areas of high wildlife value. So there are the way the geography of this region is. There are certain areas which are of higher wildlife value, and certain areas which are along the main highway, which may not have as high a value of a wildlife. And so subsequently, the selection of the villages has we have tried to follow that criteria that we would want to prioritize villages which have higher value or there's more wildlife seen around those villages. And yes, there are women who do not take part. Um, so when what we do is when we conduct a training in a community or a village, we allow for that training to be open to all the women, whoever would like to participate. And after the training has taken place, we try to place orders for products. And so there are women who might participate in a training but not take part in a production for some reasons. There may be women who take part in a production in a certain year and take a break for a year for certain reasons. And there are also participants who have stayed with us throughout these years. And there are also participants who may have absolutely not taken part in this effort. So you might likely find all possibilities.